Hey, can we talk about something? Can we talk about this card right here? So this is Mana Crypt, and y'all probably know it if you play enough Commander. This is an old argument, but is Mana Crypt actually a casual card in Commander? Is it a viable card in casual decks? Now, I will admit, the idea for this video came entirely from a Twitter post from Tomer Mavoki, or I'm not saying that correctly. Tomer, please tell me how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. But the tweet was, can Mana Crypt ever be considered casual in Commander? What if you opened it in a pack and jam it into a random deck? What if you use it to power out a very janky concept? What if you use it just for a coin flip deck? And I did give an answer to that. My answer to that was a very, very serious no, and no for the last one too. But I'll probably make a video on it, yada, 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 and that's why we're here right now, making the video on Mana Crypt. So let's go ahead and go over each of those reasons and why, and then I've got a story to tell you about fast mana in Magic the Gathering. So if you're willing to have that journey with me, then let's go ahead and go on a journey together, guys. So, as for the very first question, can it be in casual Commander? No, but here's the reason why for me, and it has to do with fast mana as a concept. Now, Tomer brings up the question, what if you opened it in a pack and then jam it into a random deck? Now, I've seen this argument made, and I think the argument isn't actually about Mana Crypt anymore at that point. It's about Sol Ring. Now, why is that argument about Sol Ring? Because every single argument you can make about Mana Crypt, you can make about Sol Ring. Because Sol Ring, outside of Mana Crypt, is probably the fastest, strongest piece of mana artillery that every deck has access to, no matter what its colors are. So let's go over what Sol Ring is and does. If you are on turn 1 and you drop the Sol Ring down on the board, you are, on turn 2, playing as if you are on turn 4. Let's say that you do the classic Sol Ring into Signet play. You are now playing on turn 2 as if it's turn 5. You can now play something like Kyler, Sigardian Emissary, on turn 2 and get your deck running. And Kyler is actually where my story begins. So, in my play group, we have a pretty decent idea of what we're okay with being in our games. We're okay with a couple of power cards being in everybody's decks. We don't have a strict no tutors clause, but if you're running your deck with like 20 tutors and then a bunch of infinites, we know that you brought a CDH-minded deck into our table, right? So, I was playing with a newer group of people, as in newer to me. Apparently they've been playing Magic for the past decade or so. And the guy to my left is playing Kyler. And I actually like Kyler a lot as a commander. I might actually use him as the basis for one of my $15 budget decks. And I thought, okay, cool, Selesnya Humans is going to be at my table. That's cool. Let's see how this goes. And his first move is to cast Chrome Mox. Now, what does this tell you? I want to know in the comments section. If somebody's playing a deck that doesn't seem like it's super competitive and the first thing they drop down is the Chrome Mox or the Mana Crypt or what have you, what comes to mind for you as a player? What kind of a game do you think you're in? Because for me, my alarm bells start ringing. Because once somebody's dropped something like Chrome Mox down, my mentality for the game has to shift. Now I know that somebody is going to be trying to play incredibly accelerated games way past what everybody else is trying to do. For instance, even in a green deck, if you have, say, a 5-mana commander like Pantlaza or so, or even the dreaded Shalayan Halar for 4 mana, if you happen to be in green or you happen to be in any other color, most mana acceleration you can get is going to run you about 2 mana, with a couple of exceptions. So we expect that a 4-mana commander coming down on turn 3, yeah, it's going to come out a turn or 2 early. But if you're opening up your game going, here's my ring, here's my crypt, here's my Chrome Mox, you're playing 6-mana commanders on turn 2. You are accelerating ridiculously high out. And if you have a Chrome Mox in your deck, I have no reason to assume you aren't going to have a Mana Crypt in your deck. Because while a Mana Crypt may be cost prohibitive, the player who puts the Chrome Mox in their deck is the same player that puts the Mana Crypt in their deck. Now, why do I have an issue with these cards? Well, if 3 people at the table are playing at a reasonable speed, they're playing a ramp on turn 2, a play on turn 3, maybe a ramp on turn 4, and then a draw spell. They're playing reasonably paced Magic, and they are still accelerating their decks out. But the player who's dropping the Ring, the Crypt, the Mox early, this player is just going full force ahead with their strategy on turn 2 without anything in the way. Now, you might ask yourself, what about commanders that cost less? Aren't commanders like Dina going much faster if we go there? I'll just go ahead and pull up Dina right now because it's super easy to go and do that. No, I can't because Moxfield's weird. But, so let's say you have a 2-mana commander, right? And that 2-mana commander is coming out. And yeah, that player is going to be getting their strategy out faster, but remember that from a game balance perspective, a creature that has a base cost of 6 mana is being treated by the game designers different than a commander that costs 2 mana. There's a certain power allocation in the amount of mana spent for a card, in theory. So when you are accelerating out Kyler early, the type of Magic that I think you're playing is way faster than the rest of the table, and Kyler's ability will get out of hand very quickly if the deck is built correctly. I'm not trying to complain about a Kyler deck. I want to go ahead and keep the conversation focused on Chrome Mox. There's 2 cards that people tend to have problems with in casual Commander. It's Fast Mana and it's Tutors. Tutors are only as powerful as the cards you're choosing to get out. And oftentimes in even CDH games, the turn 1 tutor is going for like this thing. This is what they're yanking out with the turn 1 tutor. Because the idea behind that turn 1 tutor is to get you closer to closing out the game, and that means you need lots and lots of mana. So when somebody pops down at your table and they drop a Chrome Mox, if they are trying to have a casual game, I have to ask myself, why did you not choose Utopia Sprawl? Why did you not choose Wild Growth? These are cards that provide the same amount of mana at relatively the same speed. It costs 1 instead of 0, but there's a couple things to note with them. 1, they're not cost prohibitive. Nobody at the table is going to run into problems because a Wild Growth was needed to make their deck accelerate out faster. Card costs 28 cents. But now I'm in the weeds, because if we're talking about cost prohibitive, why do I have a problem with Sol Ring? Well, it has to do with the types of games that Sol Ring creates. If you and I are at a table with multiple other players, and you are the player who gets the Sol Ring out turn 1, what is the dynamic of the table now? Are we all playing a group game of Magic at a similar speed? Or has everybody at the table decided that you need to be eliminated quickly because you might be accelerating to your plan, whatever it may be, way faster than the other people at the table? And how many times has somebody done something like dropped a Reclamation Sage on your Sol Ring, and you weren't super happy about that? Sol Ring and cards like it are accelerants that run super fast compared to the rest of the players that are at the table. If we are all wanting to have a game that closes out on turn 8 or so, Sol Ring makes that game go infinitely faster. And it's not that closing out a game quickly can be a problem in and of itself all the time, because oftentimes players have the mentality that so long as the game ended somewhat quickly, you've got time for another game. And that's a wonderful mentality to have, and I do share it for the most part. Until we're 3 or 4 games in, and we start noticing a pattern. Why does your deck have a Mox Diamond? Why is your deck using this Mana Vault? I'll get on that in a second. Why do you have a Crypt in here as well? What power level are we playing at? Can anybody at this table even agree on what a power level is? In a world where 1 mana options are as easy to find in, green decks like Kyler, this is how easy it is to find them. I can pull up a Search for Tomorrow. I can pull up a Wild Growth. I can pull up a Utopia Sprawl. And the feeling of dropping these cards down is very different to the table than when you drop down, say, your Carpet of Flowers. When you drop this down, now the player at the table who might be playing blue is looking at you going, oh, okay, so I have to land select super carefully, otherwise you are going to get out of hand. Now I have to manage my mana way differently to make sure that you don't just shoot ahead of everybody else. The table's going to literally look at me for playing an island and go, hey, why did you allow the Elves player to get 1 billion mana on turn 3? That's on you. Now, there's a couple cards that I haven't talked about in the fast mana section, and they are these two monstrosities. The Lion's Eye Diamond and the Jeweled Lotus, and they oftentimes in games of Commander do the same thing. They are often just a very quick way to power out your commander. Are these cards casual? Well, they're certainly cost prohibitive, but I don't think cost is an argument there. Again, I don't even like Soul Ring because it makes you run so much faster than everybody else that it warps the dynamic of the game. It becomes an archenemy game very quickly, unless, of course, everybody is willing to ignore the Soul Ring coming down and willing to ignore that they are now playing 2 turns behind the other player. This is where we get into threat assessment, but that's a different video entirely. So Lion's Eye Diamond's going to drop your hand away, and you're going to get 3 mana, and you're going to drop it into your mana pool, and that's going to get spent on your commander, 9 times out of 10, because it's the spell you've always got access to. It's the most important part of the commander format. Same with Jeweled Lotus. Now, I have to ask myself, when you are building your deck, if you put cards like these in it, cost aside, how fast do you need your game to be? Are you trying to win so quickly that we don't get to have a game of Commander? And if you are trying to win that quickly, how consistently are you trying to do that? Because in my experience, the players who play all of these very powerful fast mana cards, they tend to try to win quickly and consistently. So you step into a game and they say, hey, I've got a casual deck. It's casual because I've got only half of the fast mana in it. It has a Jeweled Lotus because I pulled it from a pack. The Mana Crypt's okay because I pulled it from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and, you know, I just happen to have this Mox Diamond from when I was a kid. That somehow changes things. I'm gonna let you know right now as a player, I don't care where you got your cards. I don't even care if they're proxied. I'm not super concerned with how the cardboard made it into your deck. What I'm concerned with, and will always be concerned with, is why certain decisions were made by you as a player before we stepped into our game. If your decision-making was that I want to win every time as fast as possible, and I do not care how the other players at my table feel about it, then that's wonderful. There is a format for you. CDH is a format for you. I think the only reason people are okay with Soul Ring is because every precon comes with a Soul Ring. The only reason that we have the argument about Mana Crypt is because it's cost prohibitive, and people don't like how it feels to have $200 dropped on the table in front of them and then lose to it. But players are desensitized to the Soul Ring. My argument is that if we are to have a problem with Mana Crypt, and I do have a problem with Mana Crypt, then we should equally have a problem with Soul Ring. Now, there's 2 ways to go about this. You can either have a play group that is okay with Soul Ring not being in your decks, or, you know, one day play design will ban Soul Ring. That one's not going to happen. There's never going to be a point. It's not play design that does them. You know what I mean. The rules committee. The rules committee is never going to ban Soul Ring. This card is so ubiquitous to the Commander format, and despite the amount of games that it does legitimately ruin, if you told players they weren't allowed to have it in their decks, you'd have riots. I remember as a kid, we used to joke that if a core set didn't come out with a Lana War Elf variant, then the green players were going to take shotguns to the streets. And lo and behold, there's always mana dorks in every... Well, there were mana dorks in every core set, for the most part. We are not at that part now. I'm not even going to talk about the monkey. The monkey doesn't bother me that much. There are CDH decks that make really good use of the monkey. I'm not super worried about him. But that does bring me to the land area of this. There are a couple of lands I have an issue with here as well, and for the same reasons. Ancient Tomb, and Gemstone Caverns. These are also CEDH staples because they accelerate your mana super, super hard in front of everybody else. And with no real downside. Like, if you have Gemstone Caverns in your opening hand, then it works beautifully. If you don't have it in your opening hand and you draw it later, then it's just a colorless mana that you get to play like you pulled any other card. That's wonderful. The Ancient Tomb is even stronger. This is just a Soul Ring you get to play as your mana rock. There is no downside to the Ancient Tomb, and there are people who will say the Ancient Tomb has a downside in the same way the Mana Crypt has a downside. They can damage you. I'm gonna go ahead and say right now, the 3 damage from a Mana Crypt, I have never seen that damage somebody to the point where it mattered in a game of Commander. In a CDH game, the Mana Crypt incremental damage doesn't matter because the infinite combos people are going to use are going to kill you whether or not the Mana Crypt was burning your life down. And in a non-CDH game, the 3 damage or the 2 damage you take from the Mana Crypt or the Ancient Tomb will never matter in the long run because everybody is taking incremental damage. Every deck, for the most part, has some way of damaging itself for benefit. All of the talismans and all of the pain lands people use for cheap ways of making sure that their mana is fixed come to mind immediately. You're never going to really feel that 2 damage. That detriment is never there. If somebody comes into the comment section saying that, what about Temple of the False God? That has a huge detriment. First 5 turns of most games, that Temple of the False God's never doing anything for you. It's not even acting as an actual land most of the time. But there is one type of fast mana I don't have a problem with, and there's a specific reason for it. I don't have a problem with. Also, I realize this isn't Ragavan. This is actually Dockside, but it's a different artwork of Dockside. I'll talk about him in a second. Mana Vault. I actually don't have a problem with Mana Vault, and it doesn't just have to do with it not being as cost prohibitive. It's a $40 card. Funny story, I actually got my Mana Vault by ordering a bunch of Weiss cards, and a shop accidentally sent me a Mana Vault instead of the Weiss cards, and I'm not gonna lie, I had no idea what to do with it because I wasn't playing Magic at the time, but that's how I have my Mana Vault. Felt weird to not get the cards I wanted, but I did get a Mana Vault. But I don't have an issue with Mana Vault, because ultimately, the mana from Mana Vault and cards like Jeweled Lotus and Dark Ritual and Simian Spirit Guide are all temporary. They do accelerate you for a turn, but if a player at the table stops you from doing your thing, then that's about it. You're not getting any of those benefits ever again. Now, you say, hold on, what about the Jeweled Lotus? What about the Lion's Eye Diamond? And I hear you. The same argument can be made for these. It really can. At this point, the only counter-argument I would have would be numbers. The Lion's Eye Diamond and the Jeweled Lotus are being played most of the time, I would assume, in decks where getting your commander out as fast as possible is so important because you want to win the game as fast as possible. These are your Tatiova decks, your Joyra decks, your decks that are going to, your Urza decks, your decks that are going to draw out or infinite mana your opponent so quickly if you happen to get that commander out as early as you possibly can. Imagine an AC deck going, all right, turn 1, Jeweled Lotus is going to go for my green mana, and then I'm going to use I'm going to use Ancient Tomb for a Mana Vault, and I'm going to use the Mana Vault for an Arcane Signet, and now I've got the mana I need. I'm going to drop AC down. Now I'm going to drop my second land. Aha! Nobody has the mana for any of their removal, and also I have my draw, and also I'm 2 lands ahead, and also. The issue with fast mana is that it compounds. Now, the funny thing about all this, aside from, rituals being one and done, and then suddenly they're gone, the funny thing about all this is that when we think of the types of games of Magic we want to play, we don't really think of our mana as often as we should. I mean, sure, we want to make sure that our land base is built high enough so that we can play the cards we want to play. We want to play 36 to 37 lands, unless you're doing CEDH. We want to make sure that the colors are there so we can cast our spells. But we don't think about how important that mana is sometimes. CDH players know how important that is. That's why they're willing to spend $1,500 on making sure that they have all of the fast mana I have loaded into this Moxfield page. speaking of which, let's talk about this guy. Just real quick, what is the issue with Dockside Extortionist? Well, the fact that he goes infinite with damn near everything, for one, that's one thing. But also, he actively is more powerful in CDH, but he does punish players for not playing green in casual. And that may sound weird to you, but consider the way that you accelerate your mana in most decks. If you are playing a green deck, then you're probably accelerating your mana with things like Rampant Growth, Farseek. But if you're playing anything that's not green, you're probably using your Soul Ring, your Arcane Signet, your Talismans. You are dropping all kinds of mana rocks on the board to try to keep up with your opponents. So what happens when your opponent just goes, hey, screw you. I'm just going to go ahead and generate 12 mana here real quick. Hope that's okay with everybody. Didn't really cost me anything, and you can't really do much about it. I'm not a huge fan of Dockside Extortionist. I feel like he warps the format a lot. Now, I am an advocate for all cards being made available to all players, whether this is because the players choose to proxy, or we finally get things like Mana Crypt printed into the ground properly, so they end up being about 20 bucks. I would like all of these cards to be as available to players as possible, so that we can stop having the argument over whether Mana Crypt is casual or not when Soul Ring is sitting here staring us in the face. The only reason everybody is okay with the Soul Ring in casual formats is because it is ubiquitous to the Commander format. Everybody is desensitized to the Soul Ring. But outside of single-use cards, by the way, I forgot, these cost 0 mana. That's one difference between these and Mana Vault. Just a little important there. But aside from the rituals, the only reason people are okay with this, and less okay with this, is most players can't afford this. I would like to live in a world where all players could afford this, and this, and this, and this. And when they can afford all of those, we can stop having the argument that Soul Ring is somehow better or worse than the Mana Crypt. And we can start having the argument about, hey, what kind of cards are we okay being in our decks? Most players who play at a variety of power levels understand that tutors make their deck really, really strong. But it's less often that I see those same players take out their fast mana. And as a result, their decks don't feel less powerful to the other people at the table. It still feels like they're having to fight an uphill battle when all of this mana is accelerating them forward. So I guess, really, this is less a conversation about Mana Crypt, and more a conversation about talking with your fellow players more. Make sure that you're actually okay with the kind of games you're sitting in on. When you sit down and say, hey, what power level is your deck? That doesn't mean anything. Maybe a better question would be, hey, how fast is your deck? How quickly are you trying to close the game out by? That's a more specific question, and I think players can be a little more honest when asked that question. While I think these cards don't belong in casual games, it's impossible for that conversation to ever begin if we're less willing to talk about the cards we're putting on our decks beforehand. I want to see fewer instances where players play this and say that they need this because he costs 5 mana and desperately needs to come out as fast as possible when this exists, and this exists, and this exists. We can make better deck building choices, and we can have better conversations as players to have better games of Commander. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Maybe this was just a rambling escapade. Maybe you disagree with damn near everything I'm saying. And if you haven't already, go check out Tomer's tweet that originally started this entire thing. There's a lot of conversations that are happening on there that probably deserve as much, if not more, consideration than this 25-minute long ranting video. But, as always, everybody, Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.